Let's give it like 2 minutes. Okay, we can get started while people are still joining. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Cubase training series. My name is Michael, and I'm one of the partners of Cubase Center. A brief introduction about our Cubase Center. We provide resources including latest trends in healthcare industry, entrepreneurship, and innovations, as shown in. Do you have a picture, Dan? For the next slide, yeah, thank you. As shown in the picture, we have a great incubator facility with 100K square feet at the center of San Jose for the innovations. We also have our own fund for biotech investment on pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and microservices. Cubase is consistently promoting collaborations between investors and startups. Back to the event today, I want to thank all of my colleagues for making this happen. Dan, Yanlu, Tianyi, with their help, none of this would happen. Thanks a lot. Today, we are very honored to have Lee Song from Silicon Valley Bank talking about SPAC for early stage startups, which will be very interesting to everyone, even if you're not doing it immediately. As we know, SPAC has been a super hot topic for almost 2 years. Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, the total numbers of SPAC IPOs are more than 700 now. So it will be quite interesting to understand the pros and cons of it. Lee Song is a managing director of SVB Financial Group's Asia Link practice, which promotes cross-border financial and banking services for innovation sectors in both United States and Asia. Since joining SVB in 2000, so it has been almost 20 years. Oh, it's more than 20 years. Lee has helped over 1,000 innovative startups. Some of them grow to 100 billion market cap companies. Wow. It'll be very interesting to just calculate the total market cap that you have with when they're still young. as nation expert in the United States, Lee also advises U.S. clients on best banking practices of entering Asian market and vice versa. Okay, let's get started. Tonight's event is also going to be streaming on YouTube and Facebook. So if you have any questions while you're watching, please use the chat box to communicate with us. Thank you. Okay, let's welcome Lee to give us introduction about SPAC. Lee, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. A week ago, when I was preparing for this session at a Starbucks, I ran into a neighbor of mine who's a professional matchmaker. So I asked her, hey, how's your matchmaking business? And then she said, oh, it's tough. For every one available gal I have on my book, I have 6 available guys there. So the imbalance between the male and female ratio is off the chart. So I told her that, hey, that's exactly what's happening in the SPACs market nowadays. Hello, everyone. My name is Lee Song. I'm a managing director at SVB Financial Group's Asia Link practice. SVB, as Michael introduced just now, is the go-to bank for tech and life science companies around the world. The Asia Link practice is serving as a bridge to assist US tech companies to expand to Asia and then vice versa. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you so much to the audience for joining us, and certainly thank you, Michael and Dan, for organizing this. Let me share the screen with you so we can walk you through SVB quickly and then the SPAC transaction or update. Just a quick snapshot of SVB. Our company, our firm, has been around for 40 years or so. We're a corporate bank. We don't do retail business. And under the SVB financial umbrella, there are 4 key lines of business. We have corporate banking, which catering to the tech and life science companies. Most of them are VC backed. And then we have a investment banking practice, which is really a different layer of financial services. We also have an SVB Capital, which is our venture capital investing arm. And we also have a private bank. The private bank is really catering to the high net worth or ultra high net worth individuals, usually partners at a VC firm or successful founders after they exit, et cetera. So the company is laser focused on tech and life science companies, and particularly VC funded. So we're so focused that our market share in the VC funded tech companies in the US is more than half. For every 100 tech companies funded by VC, SVB has more than 50 of them as our client. And also last year, of all the companies, of all the VC-backed IPOs, SVB's client are about 60% or more of the market share. So that's our laser focus in this field. And the firm certainly is one of the largest banks in the US, and we are one of the 500 largest public companies in the US. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of SVB. And then we're going to dive into SPACs. SPAC certainly is short for special purpose acquisition companies. This financial vehicle has been around for several decades. It's only in the past 2.5 years, it got so much attention from the professional investors world and also from the retail investors world. We're going to walk through what is a SPAC, how does SPAC compare to the IPO or traditional merger acquisition, and also some other current state of this corner of the financial market. So let me walk you through the life cycle of a SPAC transaction from start to finish. There's certainly many different steps in the whole process, but I identified 4 of them for simplicity reason. The first step is the sponsor or the organizer or the backer of the SPAC take this shell company public. And this process, this first step, you will not hear from the radio, from the media or so. So usually this is a kind of a low profile event, because what it does is that just raise funds by putting a shell company public. That's it. And the average size of a SPAC, it's about $250 million here in the US. And typically what they do is they sell shares, and the shares is always at $10 per share. So that's about it, the first step. And then the second step is that once this SPAC or this shell company is public, the sponsor, the backer of the SPAC, has 2 years to find a target to merge into. So that target could be just your company sometime in the future. And usually the SPAC has a defined sector. The SPAC maybe say, hey, I am a SPAC in the semiconductor field, or I am a SPAC in the gaming field or sports medicine field. So usually they have a defined sector, and that's how they attract the like-minded investor in the field. It's not very common for a semiconductor SPAC to merge with a life science company in the future. So it's usually just find a target in your own sector. That's the second step. The third step is the arranging. So once you identify your merger target, you go to the private equity market or private investment market to arrange the PIPE, the private investment in public equities, so PIPE. So this step is one of the crucial moments or crucial step in the SPAC market. I'm going to elaborate a little bit later on, but just keep in mind, the PIPE step is one of the key in the whole process. So you arrange the PIPE, that means the deal is almost done. You announce it, at the same time, you go through the SEC approval process. The SEC approval process usually takes probably 3, 4, 5 months or so. It's a shorter process. The reason for that is the laws and regulations treat the step 4, which is the kind of the last step, as a merger. It's not an IPO. Only the first step, you take the SPAC public, that's an IPO. When you merge, when you combine with the real business, that is a merger. It's actually technically a reverse merger, but that's off the subject here. It's a merger. So the process is relatively quick. You get the SEC approval, and then you complete the merger. The final company changed the stock ticker after the merger complete. So that's a very, very high level of the whole process. There are many different steps, a lot of detailed technical things. I'm going to avoid them for now for simplicity reasons. Let's take one of the most recent deal in the SPAC market. So this is a Vivian Health Acquisition Corporations. This SPAC went IPO at the end of 2020. So more than a year ago. It's a $200 million SPAC, kind of on the smaller side, but not bad at all. And it took the company about a year to find the target, Suniva Medical. And then they announced the SPAC merger just a few days ago, a week ago or so. And as part of the process, they were able to arrange a $10 million PIPE in this whole deal. A $10 million PIPE for a $500 million enterprise value SPAC. It's on the very low side. Usually you want it to be $50 million, $100 million, $150 million or so. So this is on the kind of smaller side, if you will. We'll explain why this is smaller side, on the smaller side a little bit later on. But keep in mind, PIPE is on the lower side. And then they're going through the SEC approval process and also shareholder announcement and voting process now. So this is a real life example, walk you through all the detailed steps, the key steps of a SPAC process here. Certainly, if you read newspapers or watch on TV, a lot of people will compare the SPAC process versus an IPO. There are certainly a lot of similarities. One of the key similarities is that both process will make your company public. Either way, you're going to be a public company. But there are significant differences between the two. There's certainly advantage of the SPAC over IPO and also disadvantage. The three advantages here I listed here, they are all because of the government regulations and rules. Because a SPAC is technically a merger, the rules regulating or governing a SPAC transaction is very different from an IPO. And that's why you have several advantages. The key advantage here is it's value certain. What does that mean? So in a traditional IPO, the company going public, you can spend the whole year, sometimes even longer, to market the process, to go through all the process. And then toward the end, in the last few days or so, even the last 2 days or so, when the market condition is not good for you, and the IPO may not go through, or you may not get the amount of money you intend to raise in a traditional IPO. But in a SPAC transaction, because it's a merger transaction, once the value is approved by the vote and also recognized by this PIPE transaction, no matter what happened to the public market, your transaction will go through. If the S&P 500 dropped 10% on that day, doesn't matter, your transaction, your company will go public through a SPAC. If the S&P 500 rose 10% on that day, doesn't matter, you will still receive the same amount of proceed as defined in the merger agreement. So value certain, the high level of certainty is certainly a huge plus for a SPAC transaction. Certainly related to that is it's a quicker process, as I mentioned. Because it's a merger, you don't have to go through a lot of the paperwork with the SEC. So it's a quicker process. The second advantage is certainly a lot less hurdle. One of the key benefits here is that you don't have to go through a very gruesome, very tiring and grueling kind of a 20-day, 30-day roadshow, talking to maybe hundreds of investors. Each presentation is maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, at most an hour, to go through the same thing again and again to hundreds of investors. But in a SPAC transaction, you typically will talk to maybe 10, 15, 20 interested investors. That's about it. On top of that, you can go very deep in your projection, very far in your projection, and that's not allowed in the traditional IPO. But in a SPAC transaction, you can do that. And so that leads us to the third benefit, which is this is a powerful tool, being able to discuss your forward-looking statement, your financial projections, how you intend to grow the company 5, 10 years from now. And because of this benefit, it's very useful for kind of late-stage venture firms, innovation companies, because a lot of your values are far in the future. No matter how much money you make now, you're investing the money back in the company, so you're not making money. You're just losing money. You're investing for future growth. And so this is another advantage that you can, for these type of companies that has values far in the future using SPAC transaction. The disadvantage, certainly, they're twofold. Number one, on an overall basis, it's more expensive than a traditional IPO. What I mean by that, if you just purely look at how much money you spend to put your company public through the SPAC transaction, it's the percentage of the fees you pay is less than a traditional IPO. But when the SPAC backer were put a SPAC IPO in the market, they have 20% of the shares of that company. So even though they didn't put in a lot of capital, but they have 20% of the ownership of the company. So that 20% of the SPAC will come into your company after the merger as a dilution. So unless the combined value of the total of the final company is pretty big, let's say 5, 6, 7 times bigger than the SPAC amount, you're going to experience some dilution. So that's why I'm saying is usually a SPAC IPO is more expensive on an overall basis for a company. The other disadvantage, kind of a smaller one, is that Because SPAC transactions are usually smaller amount and like 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, less than 5, 10 million or so, the investment bankers or financial advisors coverage is not as comprehensive. In a traditional IPO, the investment bankers will take care of finding the lawyers, finding the accounting firm, arranging all the roadshows for you. They can take care of a lot of things in the whole process. But in a SPAC IPO or process, you basically have to find those accountant or law firms yourself. So that's kind of the inconvenient part of the SPAC versus a traditional IPO. Before we talk about the current state of the SPAC market, so for the audience, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A section, Q&A part of the Zoom function here. We're going to answer that later on. And certainly, you don't know whether you might be surprised that your question might be answered in the end. So the current state of the SPAC market, this goes back to the earlier story I told about my neighbor, saying that the dating market is crazy nowadays, it's very imbalanced. The same thing for the SPAC market. There are far more SPACs looking for target companies nowadays, far more SPACs. And also on top of that, because SPACs have a 2-year lifespan, you can extend that to 3 years, but let's say, just for simplicity purpose, let's say it's a 2-year lifespan. A lot of the SPACs went IPO in late 2020, and now they need to find a target by the end of this year. Otherwise, the SPAC backers or the sponsors will basically forfeit or forgo all the original expenses, all the money they put in to put the SPAC through the IPO process. So there's a lot of hungry SPACs or sponsors looking for deals nowadays. So if you have a company that's ready for IPO, and this is your golden time. So that's the kind of the current market on the slower side. The reason why the current market is slower and is also kind of very imbalanced is that March of last year, the SEC, before March of last year, the SPAC market is crazy. It's just red hot. But at the end of March of last year, the SEC issued a statement or kind of warning, if you will. It's basically sending 3 signals to the market. All the 3 signals are related to disclosure. It's really saying, hey, investors, just be careful when you buy into a SPAC, when you buy into a SPAC IPO. So basically the SEC statement advise or require the participants, sponsors, advisors, etc., to disclose, to have full disclosure on the sponsor's financial interest, full disclosure, and also the roles and responsibility of the investment bankers and financial advisors in the SPAC transaction. And more importantly, when your company wants to merge into a SPAC, and let's say your company, the SEC statement asked your company to provide very detailed projection and very defined requirements, how you provide those projections, etc. So there's a lot of rules and regulations kind of around the SPAC market, if you will. And as a result, the volume of SPAC IPO just dropped significantly in April of last year. In March, there are 109 SPAC IPO in that single month, raised $36 billion just in that single month. And the next month, in April, there are only 13 SPAC IPOs and raised only $3 billion. So everything's just dropped by 90% or so, just within that 1 month difference. And the SEC's warning certainly played a key role in that process. And the market certainly is coming back. And the end result is that a lot of retail investors that got into the SPAC market around 2020, maybe 2019 or so, pretty much left the market. Whoever still remain in the market are the real professional money managers, if you will. So that's kind of the current state of the SPAC market. But if we look beyond US, and SPAC is doing quite well overseas, especially in the Asian market. South Korea has had a kind of a small kind of cottage SPAC industry for a while, for a couple of decades already. Japan is talking about having its own SPAC rules and regulations and market, etc. Hong Kong is doing the same thing. Singapore actually is one of the pioneers in Asia. Singapore floated 3 SPACs in the past month, so far this year already, and raised, I think, $3 billion or so. Raised a lot of money, put it that way, in Singapore. Not $3 billion, $300 million. 3 SPACs over there. So they're doing quite well. Singapore wanted to be the future financial hub of Asia, and certainly SPAC is one of the key areas they're focusing on. But that said, kind of a cooler market here in the US, very promising overseas market. If you are a entrepreneur, that you have a kind of a promising tech company, life science company, SPAC remain one of the important options for going public, for taking your company public. Speaking of taking your company public, so there are 3 things, in my opinion, entrepreneurs, founders, or even VC investors should pay attention to. They are, the number one certainly is just make sure your company is public company ready. The reason why I'm saying that, no matter how you go public, whether a traditional IPO or through a SPAC merger, you're going to be a public company after all is done. The public investors generally don't care how you got there, how you became public. They're going to treat you 3-6 months later, they're going to treat you as a real public company. So make sure you have the rules and regulations, you're in compliance, like having the audited financial statement, having the projections, having the compliance process, the internal controls, etc. Having all that in place. This is crucial. Just be fully prepared. You're going to be a public company, number one. Number two is that when choosing any SPAC to merge into, it's always a good practice to pay attention to the SPAC sponsor, the SPAC sponsor, their past experience, whether they have the know-how in your particular field, whether they've done similar SPAC mergers in the past. So that's very important. And don't worry too much about the valuation they gave you. What I mean by that is that in the end, the valuation the SPAC sponsor gave you may not be the final one, because they have to go out to the PIPE market to raise the PIPE funding. The PIPE funding is basically a group of experienced smart money private investment groups, like PE firms, whatever firms, and they're going to come in from a third party's perspective to look at your deal, see whether your company is really worth that much. So that's the kind of market test of the final value. So whatever the SPAC sponsor gave you as the final value does not hold much water there. That's what I mean by that. And the third one is have your projection ready, and certainly you can back up your projection. This is crucially important, because when you're a public company, and what you want is under promise and over deliver. Otherwise, the public investors are fairly intolerable, less patient with company that's over promise and under deliver. So it's always make sure that your projections can be tested by the market, and you have story to back up your projection, if you will. So this page is the SPACs our company has done. These are selected SPACs. We've done quite a few. I'm just selecting several tombstones here. The top layer here are the SPACs we took public. And then the second and third layer are the SPAC merger we did in helping our client. So this is just what we did over there. We've done quite a few, and just naming a few here. I'm not sure whether you can see them clearly here from your end, but just put it here as an example of our firm's capability. That's pretty much all I have in the prepared portion of it. This is certainly my contact information. I will pause here for a second in case you want to take things down or take a picture of it. Would love to hear from you and then discuss off the line after this. And certainly, if you have questions or comments, just put them in the Q&A section as well. Love to chat with you on that.
Thanks, Lee. It's really wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think there are some questions in the chat box. One of the question is, what is the typical valuation range for SPAC is looking for? Does the company have to be like unicorn to go IPO through SPAC? I think it's asking for the small startups quality.
The valuation, certainly there's a wide range of that, but it's usually within, let's say, $500 million. This is I'm saying the final combined company that usually is between $500 million to maybe 10 billion, 12, 15 billion or so, but it's usually $1 to $3, $4 billion or so. Yeah, that's kind of the 80% of the confidence interval, if you will.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another question is about the timeline. So as you mentioned, there is a compressed timeline. It's about 2 years for the M&A. What if they cannot find, like, for example, 2 years, they cannot close the deal? What is going to happen? I mean, what's about the shell?
That's a great question. So here we're going to expand the step one process we mentioned there. So the SPAC typically have a 2-year time frame, and the SPAC sponsors, they put in usually 2% of the SPAC size. Let's say they raised a $200 million SPAC. They're going to spend about $2 million as fees to the investment bankers, underwriters to flow the SPAC. They're also going to spend 2% of the SPAC amount as the at-risk capital. So in this situation, the sponsor put in about $6 million already. That's a sunk cost. They couldn't recoup that. So they're motivated to find a deal within the 2-year time frame. If they couldn't find a deal, no matter how hard they tried, the SPAC will dissolve. The backers or the sponsors will basically lose that $6 million, and the investors who invested in the SPAC IPO will get their money back. $10 plus interest, less slightly some fees. So for the SPAC investors, this is a kind of almost like an arbitrage situation. You're not going to lose, you have an upside. So almost like a call option. You buy something, you're going to get it back in return. You might have an upside, financial upside in the end.
In terms of like the percentage for that, like if you cannot get it, you probably need to dissolve the SPAC. What is the percentage? Is it very high, or is there any numbers you can tell us?
So historically, it's not that high. It's probably you try for the first couple of years and then you extend that for another year. Historically, I want to say before last year is probably 20% or less that you couldn't find a target. But going forward, the percentage will be much higher because there's 6 guys looking for 1 girl, basically.
Yeah, cool. Okay, there's another question about the comparison. As you mentioned, SPAC is also very popular right now in Asian market, like in Hong Kong and Singapore. But previously, people are using like the backdoor listing, especially in Hong Kong, a lot. What is the difference between like modern SPAC compared with the traditional backdoor listing in Hong Kong? Any difference?
I'm not that quite familiar with the situation in Hong Kong, but based on what I understand, I have certain exposure to that. The main unique thing about SPAC here is that the SPAC is a shell company. So its sole purpose is to pull the money together and give the SPAC investor a future chance to invest into another company. And the backdoor listing, or even in Asia, where you have that kind of a shell listing, if you will, or buy into a kind of existing public company, is really an existing operating company that's listed there. May not be doing well, but they have all the public company status, and then a more healthy company reverse merge into that and then take over the whole take over the public company status. That's probably the main difference. But here in the US, at least the US SPAC situation is that shell company is just a pile of money sitting there. And that's, go back to the comparison between a SPAC and an IPO, is that the industry kind of a phrase is that in a traditional IPO, is the company looking for money. So you go to the public market and you look for money. But in a SPAC transaction, it's the money looking for companies.
That feels nice if you're a good company.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from the chat box. Is asking, do you expect like to have more regulation or tougher regulation on SPAC coming years, like this year?
Certainly, this is based on my own feel and also observation. I doubt there will be more or even more stringent regulation coming out in the SPAC world, because the statement or the rule announcement by the SEC last March, that has a pretty chilling effect to the SPAC market already, because SEC's main mandate is to protect investors. For the lack of a better term, is to protect the retail investors. And because that's where the voters are, if you will. SEC certainly is a political kind of administration, if you will. So their goal is to protect the retail investors. As long as the SPAC activity has dropped off and the retail investors are largely back out of this market already, SEC, I think, is totally fine. Historically, the people who invest in the SPAC IPO are arbitrageurs. So very few retail investors even know about SPACs, and let alone just invest in SPACs. The arbitrageurs use SPAC as a way to, they buy the shares, they buy the SPAC, and then they sell the shares, they keep the warrant. Every SPAC has some warrant component to it. They keep the warrant and then enjoy the potential upside for that. And just that's what they do over there. And this is, SPAC has been a kind of a sleepy corner of the finance world until 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm thinking, just a follow-up question from last March. I think SEC give unofficial, it's not very official warning to the investors, right?
Correct.
So yeah, it's kind of ambiguous. It's like a warning, but it's not that official. Is it possible that more regulation is like in the paper, try to protect the investors, because there are some like scandals last year, especially early last year. So
yeah, it's possible they can formalize that. But as far as I can tell, SEC certainly has multiple priorities. And if they have achieved their goal by giving out a statement or release in a draft format, and they're fine, they need to move on, because they have other bigger fish to fry, if you will. Like, how do you regulate cryptocurrency? How do you regulate all the different things? They're understaffed, and then they probably will just move on for now. My personal take, though.
Okay. Okay, we have more questions in question and answer box. One audience is asking, can define de-SPAC transactions? Is it identical to a SPAC mergers with target company?
That's exactly the case. So if you recall the step 4, which is the merger complete, that can be called a SPAC merger or a business combination or de-SPAC process. Because when you complete the SPAC merger, the SPAC essentially goes away. And what you have is just that the real operating company take over the public company status, got a new ticker, and then that's it. So that's also called a de-SPAC process. Business combination, SPAC merger, de-SPAC, they're all the same thing.
Okay. Another question. Oh, I think it's still asking for how does the startup identify a proper SPAC? So it's a question for how to be qualified. I think you already answered that question. But if you want add anything, it's also fine.
Yeah, well, certainly is the question how a startup can qualify for a SPAC?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, certainly we mentioned three things that you want to be SPAC ready. That's from the kind of a more like compliance, big picture perspective. There are also a couple other things I can certainly add on. Number one is you're going to be a kind of in the public eye, if you will. Instead of your own group of VCs investing in your company, there's like hundreds, thousands, maybe even more public investors were investing in the company. So there are a lot of eyes. And typically, that group of investors are looking for a typical type of profile company. And usually, the profile they're looking for is a company that has long-term value creation prospect that can compound over the long term. So meaning you can grow quickly and big over a long term. That's number one. Number two is that the company usually needs to be able to win in multiple ways. You win in like organic growth or external partnership, if you will. So that's kind of the ideal company the public market wanted. So that's from that perspective, if you will. And if you have that, you have your product, you have your customers, you have all the internal processes in place, all you need is just a pile of money to propel you to the next level, to fuel your growth. And the SPAC or the traditional IPO or SPAC IPO certainly is the perfect way to go.
Okay. If you have any question, feel free to type it in the chat box so we can use this chance to ask Lee for the answers. I think it's the best of the best, so take the advantage of it. One question from myself, actually, you mentioned like the SPAC compared with IPO after 3 months, they're the same, but why 3 months? In this 3 months, what is going to happen? Once they go into the market, they're eventually, I know they'll be the same, right? But after a certain time of period, but what is going to happen in this certain time period?
Michael, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I have some noise here outside my home here.
Yeah, I was asking like you said after 3 months, I mean, compare with the traditional IPO, right? SPAC is going to be in the market. Eventually, they're going to be the same. But you said like after 3 months, the SPAC is going to be the same as a traditional IPO, but why there's a time period?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think I said after 3-6 months or so, you'd be the same as a traditional IPO. Yeah. So there are two things. Number one is usually there's some kind of a honeymoon period of time because there's you're kind of, we call that on the run type of company, meaning you're so fresh in the market, people give you some benefit of the doubt, your story is fresh in the marketplace, there's a lot of coverage to the company, if you will. So press covers you, all that. That's your honeymoon period. Usually, the first test is when you release the first earning release. People will scrutinize that to see, I mean, how the actual earning compared to what you promised before. If you miss the first quarter, you might be able to get away with it, but if you miss the second one, you're basically done for a long period of time. And also for large investors that's disciplined in the public market, their mandate is that you cannot invest in a new company or new IPO company until after the first or second earning release. That's in their mandate because they're disciplined.
Gotcha, totally understand. I think that's generally true even for newly IPO companies using the traditional way. Also, first couple months, 3 to 6 months is crucial.
Yeah.
My second question is, you said this that the pipe is a key for the mergers. Basically, if you don't have to care too much about the valuation the SPAC company give you, but the pipe is actually crucial because you're smart money. However, does the startup company get the final say for pipe, or it totally depends on the investors?
It's a give and take. It's a result of negotiation. Certainly the tech company or the target company can draw a line in the sand and say, hey, I'm not going to sell. I'm not going to proceed with a merger until I get this valuation. That's fine. But if the market couldn't take that price tag you put on your company, the merger is off. So the pipe investment and the result of the pipe investment is the market test. No matter how much you and I, you're the buyer, I'm the seller, you and I negotiate the price, we're going to take the price to the public market and then to test it. But before we do that, the pipe investor are going to market test the price we put in for the combined company. And public investors, after the SPAC merger, the shares floated in the marketplace, the public investors will look at how big is the pipe investment as a sign whether the price will hold or not.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Are there any questions from the audience? There's a question that's asking for the ownership of the company. If they want to go with the process for SPAC, do they lose any voting power in terms of the board of directors after SPAC mergers?
Could you repeat that one more time, please?
Yeah, just I mean, will I lose control of my company after the SPAC SPAC mergers in terms of voting? And
in the absence of the Class B shares, which is a totally different subject here, certainly the voting power or voting right is a reflection of how much you own the company. And usually, any IPO or even a SPAC merger is a dilutive process. Like you're raising the next round, you're going to dilute certain voting power or share of the company. It's just really depending on how much shares you still have in the end, and then how many board seats you will keep or you will have, et cetera, all that. Certainly, when you're a public company, one thing to keep in mind is that you're going to follow the public company rule. There's going to be an independent board member, or maybe more than one, on your board as an independent board member. So that's by the rules. As a private company, you don't even have that. You can just you, me, Dan, the three of us own the company, and then we're the board member. That's it. So as a public company, we're going to have at least one more, and several more, because there's a minimum number of board members for a public company. I think it's 7 or so. More than that, yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I think there is another question in the chat box asking.
Hey, hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second, please. Let me take care of this thing here.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm back. Apologize.
Okay. Yeah. One question I think. Yeah, you can answer basically better than anyone else. So it's asking what are the major roles that SVB is playing in those SPAC transactions?
First of all, who asked that question? Thank you so much. I'd like to meet that person. Thank you so much.
I mean, there are different people.
Okay, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So SVB as a financial group certainly plays several different roles in the whole process. The most obvious one is our investment banking team will handle the SPAC IPO. We'll take the sponsor's shell company IPO. That's what we do. We also go through our corporate banking clients to see any of them are target candidate. So any SPACs out there can buy our client as the SPAC merger process or combination. And certainly our investment bankers will serve as the underwriter or the advisor in that process. So that's pretty kind of the first line of defense, if you will. And also, when you complete the SPAC transaction, the company certainly will want it to grow because you have so much more capital or additional capital now. You'll be able to borrow money to leverage your balance sheet to grow even more. And invariably, a company after a SPAC merger will take on additional debt. And certainly that's where the corporate banking team of SVB will come in and meet our clients' need as well. That's on that part. And the last one is in not rare, but in some cases, our VC or PE client will want to be the SPAC sponsor. So they will come to us and say, hey, SVB, I'm going to float a SPAC in the market, but I wanted to borrow some at-risk capital from you. You remember the first the $6 million or so we talk about. So I'm going to borrow some of that from you, maybe borrow half of that from you, etc. And SVB certainly provide loans to that as well. So several different ways we serve our client when they have the SPAC needs.
Thanks. Certainly, SVB is playing a super important role in this process, leading this whole process for sure. A question about Asian market. Asking for like the Chinese market, like the offshore structures, are those Chinese targets still available to list on U.S. Capital market by SPAC during current situation? Is it possible?
It's not a SPAC specific question anymore. It's the VIE question nowadays. The SEC has in numerous occasions in the past 6 months or so, maybe a year or so, issued warning after warning on the VIE structured company. So they are pretty careful and also very thorough in reviewing the VIE structured company to go IPO here in the US. Even after the IPO, the requirement for financial reporting or the draft paper for all the audited financial statement are a kind of a big hurdle to clear. So I don't think it's SPAC related. It's really SEC's view on VIE structured company related.
There's a question from Sean Liu is asking for how to define the correct pipe size. So I think you already answered that question, but in case you wanted to add anything.
How do we define
how to define the right pipe size? I think he is asking for the negotiation, how the startup is negotiating for the pipe size. Of course, you want to go as high as you want, but what is the correct pipe size?
It certainly ebbs and flows, goes with the market, if you will. So, for example, a typical SPAC is $250 million. And a typical combination value after the whole thing, it could be $1 billion, 1.5 billion range or so in that situation. So $250 million SPAC, the final value is 1.5 million or so. So in this case, any pipe size of 100 million or more, that is a good vote of confidence by the private investors, professional smart money investors already.
Okay, due to the time, we have a last question. So it's a question asked by Tony Shen, is asking, are there any resources or website that you can provide so people can learn the details about these SPACs? Is there any resources you recommend? Thanks.
There's certainly, I'm sure there are enough materials you can Google around. Usually the big accounting firms will have some type of literatures for you to go through and then get a view of a SPAC transaction, but those are relatively kind of on the top level, not very deep, if you will. If they go deep, it's kind of accounting audit requirement related, if you will. And this is a relatively sleepy part of the finance world. There's not a lot of public information until 2 years ago. And so just Google around. The more you Google, the more you will find. And certainly in our firm, it's really just going through the client transaction one another, and then you kind of gain all those knowledge and know-hows. I'd be happy certainly to chat offline with this friend here, or we can chat a little more.
Yeah, I think there's a last question for yourself, and I mean, I think it's I can't read the name. How Ren. He or she is asking, great sharing. Can you share with us what is your leadership role at AsiaLink, and what AsiaLink playing a role under SVB umbrella? Thanks.
Okay, so the AsiaLink practice, well, SVB, first of all, is a global company. Our largest activities are here in the US, and we have more than half of the VC-funded tech companies' market share in the US. So we have a dominant position in the US. And we also have a very, very fast-growing piece of business in Asia, primarily in mainland China. And so there are a lot of times we need to coordinate and the client deal flows from the US to China, or to Asia, from Asia to the US. So my team, AsiaLink, is just coordinating or facilitating, developing those deal flows, both way, if you will. I manage the AsiaLink practice here in the US. I have a partner, she's in Beijing, so two of us kind of play ping pong, if you will, take care of all the client need for the AsiaLink practice. And one of the key mandate that I have for myself is to stay closer to the Asian innovation community here in the US. And certainly I'm so happy, so honored to have great partners of Q-Bay Center here as our kind of partners, and to serving our kind of the innovation community or the ecosystem here in the Bay Area.
Same here as well. Okay, due to the time, we have to stop here. If you have like more questions, feel free to leave it in the chat box, or email us, or email Lee directly. Thanks for coming, and thanks, Lee, for the wonderful presentation. We certainly learned a lot today. Everyone understands SPAC a lot more. And it's not a mysterious field anymore. So we're just the closest. Dan, do you have a slide that we can? It's fine. So we're expanding our business in regions like globally right now for Q-Bay, for also Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Israel, New Zealand, and Japan. So in United States, we have, this is a slide. So we're a global company. So we have sites in San Jose and in Boston. Feel free to contact us if you're interested in the facilities, or if you have any question for our facilities, or if you have any questions for today for SPAC, feel free to contact us. We're always here. And thanks a lot, Lee Sun, for the wonderful talk again. I mean, it's really a great honor to have you here this afternoon. And thanks a lot, everyone. We will probably see you guys next time, and have a nice evening. See you.